Hey, welcome to the next episode of Agile, actually, where we are going to be talking about mindset versus philosophy. And with us today, we obviously have myself and Simon, but we have a special guest, which is Oscar. How are you doing, Oscar?
Hello. Very good, thank you. Very good, and thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. So, this invitation to Oscar came about from a side discussion. There's a lot of noise we see around agile mindset, agile outlook, agile schema, agile philosophy.
Yeah.
Does it matter? Now, we've done a previous podcast about words matter. Is anybody not in the agile echo chamber at all bothered about what you call it? Or is it just the people in the agile echo chamber that just like doing a an overly exaggerated bout of navel gazing about what we call this particular thing? And we're going to follow that up with the second question is given the events of 23, does it impact or matter really? Discuss. Did I frame that nicely?
I think that worked quite well, Simon. And I think you're right that outside of, let's call it, the agile community, i.e., people who are in the agile space, making money off the agile space, talking about agile. That's what I would call the agile community. Um, Outside of that, nobody cares what it's called, whether it's a mindset or it's a philosophy or it's a schema or an outlook or whatever it is. They don't really care. And to be honest, they don't really care whether it's called a backlog item or a user story. They don't really care. They're going to call it whatever they call it. And I do find that the only two times when I care about when words matter. If you remember from the previous podcast, Simon, the only two times I care when words matter is one, when I'm training
Yep.
and I'm being specific about this is what this is how I'm defining it, and when I say this is what I mean. Um, and when I'm talking on the PST WhatsApp group, right? Because that's part of that echo chamber, but it's where we're talking about and noodling on those not, I guess there are technical pieces, right? The technicalities of it, but it's when those conversations spill out onto LinkedIn that you start getting a bunch of civilians, normal people who don't really care about the difference, going blah 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 blah, framework wars, blah 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 blah, and it's not. It's people having a conversation using terminology within the context of a specialist subject, and it can sometimes look like um, framework wars. Although there is also framework wars, right? That is also a thing. Did that kind of make sense?
Yeah, you're talking about jargon, right?
Yes, just like if you had a couple of, I definitely would never compare myself to a neurosurgeon, right? But if you had a couple of neurosurgeons having, or three neurosurgeons having a conversation about some piece of their work, to folks from the outside, it's either going to sound unintelligible or elitist or just a bunch of crap, right?
Well, I'm really hoping that three neurosurgeons discussing something of infinite technical detail is elitist because I want them. I
I
want them
want
to
to be.
demonstrate their 14 years of training. Thanks very much. Um,
Hmm.
who knew that, experienced practitioners actually have to earn their stripes? Oscar, what's your thoughts, mate?
I think you're both kind of capturing my point on this as well. What springs to mind as we're talking about it is one of the things you see a little hint of it behind me is the Cynefin framework by the wonderful Dave Snowden, and that's gone through several iterations. And it's not because he thinks it's lots of fun. I think it's an effort to get better accuracy in the language that is being used to describe the phenomena, right? And I think what comes to us is ultimately we are empiricists, right? We are following the evidence. We're trying to, as best possible, capture these things and then find language to share them with others. And as we find language that better describes what we're actually trying to do, we want to use that. And then, of course, people who are not as informed, as you say, not as expert, they might go, well, hang on a minute, you told me this and now you're using this language. Why did you misinform me, right? So people can often feel not offended, but they can feel, I guess, hurt or confused as to why things are suddenly different when they learned something. And especially if they've been in a capacity where they have been furthering that advice, that can suddenly feel like they've been now sharing the wrong message and they can feel upset as a result. So I can see why there's a lot of emotions in here, even if everyone understands why we're doing it. But absolutely, I would say to the and I'm one of these people. I get annoyed with the phrase of civilians for non-practitioners of stuff. I hear comedians and others saying, these civilians. I'm like, they're people, right? We're all people, right? But I understand what we use, right? It's the layman, it's the normal person, the non-nerds, right? Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. The muggles, yeah, exactly.
A little bit harsher.
Exactly. And yeah, I think to them, ultimately, it doesn't matter. They care about getting on with their day, doing their 9 to 5, staying happy, paying their rent. That's what ultimately matters, right? But for us, I think it's important to nerd out about this.
There's a thing that upsets me, though. I guess upset is probably too strong, right? It's I'm not sitting crying in the corner, but irks me is when those discussions are weaponized, and I'm not saying I don't weaponize them myself, right? I'm definitely not a saint in that story. I don't think any of us are, but when you see those posts, I think Simon was talking about it before, that Agile is dead, right? Or I don't know.
Scrum is dead.
Scrum sucks. Whatever it is. It's not usually as generic as Scrum sucks. It's usually
no. That's a big theme. I've seen a lot of it this year.
Reviews don't work, or who needs the daily planning? Right?
But every time I've seen one of those, Martin, to jump in, I think I'm going to articulate your point. Every time I've seen one of them, they then list off a litany of stuff, and it reminds me of Inigo Montoya and The Princess Bride. Is like, I don't think that word means what you think it does, and what they're describing is not Scrum or is not Agile. And this goes back to our previous thing about the importance of vocabulary. And to leap in, there's a reason Dave Snowden used Cynefin.
Yep.
He deliberately chose a Welsh word. And by using that, it enabled him to open up a discussion about that space. And really, it's to get people to be mindful and not to jump in to going, I'm in this quadrant, I must do X. And that's why Stacey got rid of his matrix, because people were abusing it, right? And that's the danger, is when folks who don't understand the full portent of a key word then start using it or misusing it, it creates more confusion.
Well, and also the immediate response that they have, because our immediate response when somebody says, I'm just going to pick something. The sprint review doesn't work because the product owner shouldn't be hearing about things at that moment in time, right? So you and I all know that though that's not how the sprint review is supposed to work. Your purpose is to get your stakeholders in, and your product owner should be the one doing it. It's their marketing event, collecting feedback and engaging with the stakeholders, rather than it being the people doing the work, marketing and presenting it to the product owner. But the immediate response when we correct that, I don't know, incorrectness,
misunderstanding
is, you're just saying it, we're not doing it right, and that's why it doesn't work. And that's the immediate rebuttal to any defense of any specific technical topic, right?
I'm
Oh,
laughing.
we just said we're not doing it right. Me.
I'm laughing because my wife and I had a massive argument about pizza and calzone, and this just goes to show what a nerd I am. The argument was pizza does not equal calzone. That's my thesis.
Yep.
Right? Because pizza is a flat piece of dough with some sauce, some ingredients, some cheese, you bake it. It comes out in a certain format. Now, a calzone will have a similar thing. It's dough with ingredients and cheese and sauce, but you fold it over.
Yep.
My wife's argument was, but it's got the same ingredients. And I'm like, yes,
Sure.
but there's a different output. And we ended up agreeing to disagree. I'm like, a pizza does not equal calzone. And she's like, yeah, they're close enough. And I'm like, no, it's not, because the cheese doesn't grill and melt and all that lusciousness you get out of a pizza. Whereas you fold it over, it just melts. It doesn't get that nice crispy bit that you should get off it. And this is the same thing that happens in the agile world, whereas most people are just going, I don't care, I'm hungry. Can I just have some food? Yeah. And it's only us agilists that are really... And then you talk to an Italian about pizza and you mention pineapple and it starts a whole other conflagration.
Yeah. There's violence going to happen at that point. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the crux of the issue, but I don't know that there's a resolution to it, or even the intent that there should be a resolution to it, right? Because if I was observing a bunch of people talking about some technical context that I don't understand, and for example, if I was doing, I say I'm doing, actually I'm going to use a specific example because it was my favorite one of all time. Because it was not my finest moment in my reply, but I was working with an organization in the US, and I was doing a presentation to the entire leadership team, the development team, and we were talking about DevOps, right? So this was in my DevOps days. We're talking about DevOps, we're talking about continuous delivery, we're talking about unit tests, we're talking about all of those things, and I'm showing how those things work in Visual Studio. Like, as I'm talking, I'm doing that. And I was talking about unit tests. And the lead engineer in the organization kind of stopped me and said, that's not what we call unit tests. Right? So I'm talking about testing a single unit, running lots of tests, right?
Not crossing a class boundary.
Sorry?
Not crossing a class or method boundary.
Yeah, all of that goodness.
So I just want to make sure that you and I are aligned.
And yeah, exactly. And she said, that's not what we call unit tests. I was kind of like, well, what's a unit test for you? And she said, well, we open it up in Visual Studio, we hit the play button, and we click through the application, and that's a unit test.
Oh, that's an exploratory test.
Right? But that's where they come back to that words matter. They're doing unit tests wrong. They're using the word unit test to describe something that is not absolutely categorically is not a unit test. I think we got down to I think one of my replies was I used the Wikipedia definition of unit test. Right?
That sparked an idea in me on where now we move from the transition of why us as, experts and nerds care about words, and where it actually starts to now go into the overlap of where using the right language starts to impact, the average person, right? The actual consumer. And if I was a stakeholder and in their definition of done, it said that they had unit testing throughout the product, and I'm expecting therefore a certain quality in there, and what they have defined as unit testing is not what they're actually doing, now there's a problem.
Well, I got to the bottom of it, Oscar. And exactly what you're saying is what happened, is that somebody in the business had heard about this unit tests thing didn't understand it enough to know what is and is not a unit test, and said, I want to see you running unit tests. I want to see higher quality in my product, right? As you would expect a business to demand higher quality in their product. It's okay, they were only writing software that managed gas running through pipelines across the US. So
That's all right. It's only America, third world nation. Don't worry about it.
Nothing that needs quality.
Not
Because
risk
the
critical.
business mandated unit tests and their software sucked, right? And I'm just using that as a colloquial suck. It was not designed in a way that would enable you to write effective unit tests, right? That's what I mean by sucks. And so because it was so hard to write unit tests, but they were required by the business, they're measured to write unit tests, they came up with a way of meeting the measure without actually doing the thing, i.e. we'll just change the definition of the thing.
Oh, that's almost as good as the all tests pass, and that at the end of each test you've just got to assert is true.
Yeah, isn't this exactly that story of, well, people will just say you're not doing it right. You know, Agilists will just say you're not doing it right, when actually they are in fact not doing it right.
All right, so we're going down the words matter rabbit hole again, and from what I'm picking up, we're all having a heated agreement, and we can pull more examples than we care out of examples where we get cross discussion, where we have a misunderstanding based on different definitions. I think we concur, right? Certain keywords, certain jargon has is incredibly important for a nuanced conversation. To get us back to the headline, does it really matter whether we talk about an agile mindset, an agile outlook, an agile schema, an agile philosophy? Like, when we get to that very high level, does it matter? Because I remember a while ago I chucked a LinkedIn post out and said, mindset, implies a fixed outlook, like mindset. Like you look at it and you go, mindset, okay, we're set. Whereas agile outlook implies that it can change, and this is one of the things I love about Snowden's work on estuarine mapping and stuff. He talks about direction of travel over goals, because we really don't know, and by mixing that up, opens up that ability to reflect and change. So my question to you both, given that we accept vocabulary is really important for a nuanced discussion, when we get to the meta, does it really matter whether we say outlook, philosophy, mindset, schema, or is it just those in the agile bubble? What do you reckon?
I think I'm going to say something opposite to what I said before. I think it fundamentally does matter when you're the one who's seen as the expert in that space, that you use terminology that's representative of the thing you're trying to communicate. Because while people may not use the average person who's then regurgitating that may not use the same terminology. Like you just said, Simon, the difference between mindset, fixed state, and outlook, moving state, is actually quite an important distinction from the perspective of, and that's why I talk about red versus blue, right? Your theory X versus theory Y, Taylorism versus whatever you want to call a different state. We're trying to engage. If we forget about the term agile, right, we're trying to engage with people and enable them to be in a fluid state, to be like the boxer that's rolling with the punches and engaging with the situation as it happens in order to get to some kind of conclusion or outcome that they're trying to achieve. And agile is just the current word that we use to talk about that movement. And it's had different words in the past, and it'll have different words in the future, and that part is irrelevant. That's why I think, while as experts our words matter, but for the average person the words don't matter. Does that make sense? I know I say "does that make sense" a lot. Jessica gives me trouble all the time for repeatedly saying
I think it does. And I think it comes into what experts say eventually does trickle into common parlance and common understanding. And I think we see it a lot in language in all spaces. And I think, not to get into the does language matter thing, but even in terms of this, it does long term have an impact, because talking about mindset and saying this, hey, you've got the wrong mindset, right? You need to have the right mindset, versus even saying you got the wrong outlook or you need a different outlook. Even then, there's a emotional response to being told you think wrong versus you're not quite looking at it right. And even there already, there's a pretty large impact. And if we talk about, hey, let's look at things differently and approach them differently, that I think that will trickle down.
Do most people get that
Was that?
distinction? Do most people get that
Good point.
distinction between outlook and mindset? I'm not sure most people do.
And this is where mindset has been in common parlance for a long time, right?
Yeah.
And the rebuttal from one person was like, you're redefining a commonly used term. And that can create confusion, which I thought, reasonable point. You haven't changed my mind. And I think when, be it Agile, be it whatever, what we're trying to do is get things to move in a more positive direction and enable that adaptability, that inspect and adapt cycle, that learning, continuous improvement. That's one of the things that people latched onto about the Toyota way and lean, where you start using those key terms. And they were Japanese because that was the framework, right? It was primarily in Japan. And it's interesting to see people misuse those because there's nuance, right? Interestingly, different cultures will translate the words. And I think it came up on the WhatsApp group that the word, like the Harry Potter movies, like the first Harry Potter book and movie in the rest of the world is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, where it's the Sorcerer's Stone in the United States. Now, interestingly,
it's because philosophers are scary to Americans.
Well, I don't want to go into any, baiting of stereotypes here, but that whole, like, all science stemmed from the ancient philosophers. They were some of the earliest exhibitors and practitioners of an empirical approach. They'd have a theory and they'd riff on it. Now, interestingly, it was the Spanish Inquisition and the Christian purge of the Middle Ages that lost us a lot of the ancient Greek works, because it talked about atomic principles and empiricism and polytheism, or even the potential absence of a god.
Yep.
So, if we think about those words, questioning how it translates into languages other than English, I'd love to be able to speak another language, but does it just default to Wikipedia? And the danger of that is anyone can edit Wikipedia, right?
Well, so you say that, however, the average amount of time something that is incorrect in a main article stays on Wikipedia is minutes, because somebody will come along and correct it. The difficulty with Wikipedia is that it represents prevailing understanding, not actual correctness. But then, really, does anything represent actual correctness? The Encyclopedia Britannica was one organization, one group of people's interpretation of the facts and the understandings and the definitions. Wikipedia just represents the collective understanding of the contributors to its content, right? So if you go onto Wikipedia and change it to say something that is different from that prevailing understanding, it will be corrected back. Corrected, I'm using the wrong phrase, right? It's not correct, but changed back, right, to what it was before. And I think that's where there's in general, a lot of folks disregard what it says on Wikipedia, but it actually represents what the current best understanding of that topic, right?
Of the majority view of a large collection of people. Now, the thing is that you get into certain skills and disciplines, the majority view is not necessarily correct.
I agree. I never said, yes, I was not attesting to the correctness of Wikipedia, just that it is the prevailing understanding. But if you were an expert in psychology and you have the credentials to back that up, and you cite the references in order to get something that the prevailing understanding you want to change, and you go into the bit of Wikipedia that we don't really look at, right, is the talk part and the debate around the topic, and people proposing changes and the debate that ensues around that, referencing material. And in general, most people that participate in the debate generally understand the topic that's under debate, right? They're either self-styled experts who's read a lot on that topic and read a lot of the references, which is really the same as much as anybody can do, or they're qualified experts, i.e., they've been through some kind of accreditation, university, or whatever it is on that topic. So I think it's fair to say that Wikipedia is generally correct. I'm not saying that it's all correct, but I would also say that there's no textbook that is all correct.
Okay, so interestingly enough, you've dumped the Wikipedia bit in the chat. It's a mindset is an established set of attitudes of a person or group concerning culture, values, philosophy, frame of mind, outlook, and disposition. So it's
the reason I put it in the chat was because it includes both outlook, philosophy, disposition is included in that understanding of mindset, and it could be that this is where dictionaries are difficult, right? Because dictionaries generally have an editor or editors, and that editor or editors decides when the words change. There's a great blog post, not blog post, but a blog of somebody who is that person who edits the definition of words on the internet, and they write blog posts about their journey of discovery on a particular word, and the amount of effort they put in is huge, but there's hundreds of thousands of words in the dictionary. They can't get to all of the words in the dictionary on a frequency that something like Wikipedia, for example, can provide, that perhaps Wikipedia better represents the meaning and definition of things as most people use it and understand it.
I think we're straying off topic. Right? We're straying into the whole world of is democratization of veracity as valid as experts, which interesting, but not quite on point.
Sure.
So if I summarize, what you're suggesting is that given that Wikipedia uses mindset as a catch-all for all those terms, call it mindset and move on. Stop getting worried about it.
Yeah, stop messing around. You use the word you like, but don't get upset if people use mind. Don't correct people for using the word mindset when it includes the word you're using anyway.
Okay, right. So, interesting other thing is, I think people take offense too easily these days, but that's another possible podcast.
That is definitely. I think that could be a dangerous podcast, but yes.
Well, yeah. Anyway, so stop taking offense. It's a words. As long as you're heading in the right direction, get over it.
Yep.
Oscar, you're nodding.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been mulling over what you've been talking about in the background, and I think I'm in agreement. It kind of occurred to me in terms of, again, I think it's difficult, if not impossible, to separate some of this in terms of using the right language and also does language matter. And a big thing, which I know we've had a conversation as a wider group before, offline, so to speak, uh, is about the evolution of language. And I think chances are mindset, as we were starting to talk about this early on, we felt uncomfortable with because it didn't quite mean what it's starting to mean in common parlance anymore. And my mother is a linguist in the English language, and one of the things she told me as a fun thing to care about language was, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember the exact line, is something around the lines of, "I am so gay to have intercourse with you tonight," which meant I'm very happy to be talking to you tonight.
Yep.
Right. These days, it would be interpreted as something very different.
Yep.
Right. And I think the same is probably happening with things like mindset now as well, where as experts, we've been focusing on the specific meanings of some of these words. And I know for a lot, the discomfort has been that mindset isn't really a defined thing, but perhaps it's starting to be. And maybe we as experts now need to catch up with the evolution of language and use mindset instead.
Okay, so given that we're all professional Scrum trainers, and we also have very strong interest in Kanban, there's certain reserved words that are very important to us, right?
Yep.
So stick with them, let it go. And I think it's also then leading us to the second point is the state of the backlash against agility in social media, the changes throughout 23, the great purging in American industry at any point of Scrum Masters, Agile coaches. This also ties into like should life coaches be Scrum Masters and stuff like that. But basically, if we're not helping shift the needle in organizations, us sitting on the sidelines, mucking around, having word games, we're going to be unemployed really quick, right? Because you're really not adding any value there. Unless there's that, like, unit tests, exploratory tests, there's a hill I'm prepared to die on, right? That's really important to your testing pyramid. It has a huge impact on your DevOps cycle, your feedback loops, all of that good stuff. That's really important, but mindset, get over it. But sprint, I think it's worthwhile for the Scrum vocab and the Kanban vocab is once we get into the detailed elements of framework, making sure it's specified and used well. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think that goes back to our words matter. When there are reserved words, if you're working within a particular context, those words have very specific and explicit meaning and not other things. The same way when a surgeon's performing an operation and they ask for a particular implement that has a particular name, they expect to get the thing they're expecting to get because everybody understands that this is what that thing is. So when we talk about sprint review or we talk about a sprint, those words have very specific meaning, or we talk about cycle time, or we talk about, well, maybe we don't talk about lead time, but we talk about cycle time, right? And I'm trying to avoid the what's the phrase I usually say? Square is to rectangle as lead time is to cycle time, right? They're all cycle times. There's just a special name for some particular cycle times that aren't always as reserved as we think they are. But cycle time is the specific what the thing is that I mean. But things like that, things like throughput, things like our work item aging, these are things that are very specifically defined. And luckily, they're really weird words that people don't use for other things. The difficulty, I think, is that, and I read recently that in the most recent State of Agile report, 90% of all software teams surveyed said they were doing Scrum. 90%, right?
I think that going back to my pizza analogy, the number of varieties of what really is a pizza is now wide open, right?
Yeah. And it's the same with that. If we were to compare what that 90% of people said to what's in the Scrum guide, 90% of them are probably lying, right? They're not actually doing what it says in the Scrum guide. They're doing something that's kind of similar. And that's where, when we talked before about words matter, I really liked that the ALM Rangers at Microsoft, when they implemented a version of Scrum to help them in their context. It was a very specific context. They couldn't have dailies because people weren't full-time and all this kind of stuff. They called it ruck, right? They used a different word. It's another Scrum terminology, Oscar, from rugby terminology. They used a different word to mean that thing when AAA in the US, or is it AA? I can't remember. AAA, I think, in the US, the insurance company, cars and stuff, when they implemented Scrum, they used, I think they called it races instead of sprints, right? Because they changed the definition and they created their own terminology that made sense within their context so that they could customize it and not get confused with the other thing of the actual name that they're subbing from. And I feel that I feel that needs to happen more, but I'm also conscious that nobody gives a crap about what Martin wants, right? And just because I would like to see that doesn't mean anybody else really cares. And that's also something that we have to understand as coaches and facilitators and PSTs. All three of us here are professional Scrum trainers with Scrum.org. And we've mentioned WhatsApp a couple of times. There's a WhatsApp group, there's a Slack group for our community. And we talk about all kinds of things on there. Sometimes it's just rants, right? But we do talk about things on there. And that we need to get over ourselves as well, that not everybody else cares about our topic as much as we care about our topic.
Yeah, for sure. I think I'm liking the distinction here in terms of some language doesn't really matter. We can argue about it because it's interesting and we can get into the details of why. Like mindset, ultimately the language evolved, it's common parlance, and people more or less understand what we're referring to with it. When language does matter, it's things like unit testing. And I would maybe even go so far as it truly matters when we're making commitment towards it. When we're committing to this language meaning a certain thing and thus impacting other people, then we might want to be more careful how we're actually using it.
So language does matter, vocab does matter, language does change, it does emerge, it does evolve. This leads us to our second point. How do we encourage, demonstrate, model, like drink our own champagne and get folks in the Agile echo chamber, fishbowl, glass bubble, whatever, to start getting out of this place? Because, you mentioned it, framework wars, semantic wars. My framework's better than your framework. My definition of rectangle is better than yours. We've seen it in the year of 23 where there's been people are reevaluating the actual value add of Agile coaches, Scrum Masters. We've seen, I've noticed a trend of rise of products. People tending towards the term product management instead of product ownership, but they want product ownership. But in the same way that, like, rant of mine, DevOps is just Scrum done properly. But as per Martin Fowler's Flaccid Scrum article, so many people were calling it Scrum and it was just lack of process discipline, lack of done.
Yep.
The industry needed to find a term to making sure that this thing can go out the door safely. Hence DevOps. And it took me a few years to realize why I was so grumpy about it. And apart from my default background state of grumpy, so exceptionally grumpy. And then I realized it's just, we had to come up with a new term because the old term was so abused. Now, given that there's this noise about Agile's dead, there is a reevaluation of the value that coaches, trainers, scrum masters, supporting agents apply in business. What's next? Where do we go from here? Oscar?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point. I know, it's something I've done. I think almost any practitioner, to distinguish from those who do just sit around and navel gaze and actively do nothing, but they're actually just not doing nothing. The people who have actually affected change, right? Often I have found that we have, by necessity, essentially done Agile or Scrum by stealth. Right? That is to say, we do it, but we don't use any of the language because it's been tainted. And I think we're seeing a larger reaction to that as well, as a lot of people have been in these bad environments, and they've gotten people they thought were expert, who they now have fired, realizing they were not expert, to help them try and improve things. And as such, now they have this bad taste in their mouth of Agile or of Scrum, etc.
Yeah.
And I'm not entirely sure where the next step is. I've seen noise around Agile 2.0, Scrum 2.0, all these other things. Now, to be clear, there are official things being called that. I'm not bashing on them specifically. It's more about, I'm not sure that is the answer as such. I do think maybe a larger rebrand or rethink might be needed, especially as we are now realizing very much it's not about software. It's about complex, tricky problems that we're trying to figure out, right? And how we organize as people around solving those. And then I think maybe it is worthwhile moving from things like the Agile Manifesto, which, if we're being finicky, talks about better software development, right?
Yep.
Even though I tend to switch out software for product in my own courses, for example.
Yeah, I do as well. I score it out and have. I think I remember working with an organization in Norway, I guess close to 10 years ago, between 8 and 10 years ago. And they talked about transformational fatigue. That they'd already had 5 or 6 organization-wide attempts to change the organization. And they'd all resulted in flaccid change. Let's call it flaccid change. Ineffective, unrealized outcomes, because I'm going to suggest that it's because they wouldn't let go of the Tayloristic practices that are the root of the reason why, the fundamental, let's base our business model on distrust, right? That fundamental thing. And they didn't address that. And I think that's the thing that when I look at the Agile 2.0s, which there's nothing wrong with, I've read some of the stuff around it, and all of the things that other people have been trying to do, because all of the experts kind of agree, right? This is the thing, we're all arguing online about semantics for the 10% we disagree on, rather than just agreeing and having a unified front on the 90% we do agree on, right? But when you go and look at Agile 2.0, I'm reading the stuff going, but that's just what we've always been talking about with Agile. It's just that there's it's branched, right? And there's the I'm going to be very specific, the Scrumbok type of version of Agile, right? Which is
Scrum MMI.
Well, it's let's take all these concepts in Agile and implement them in a Tayloristic based on distrust way, and then we can sell that to organizations, because then they don't have to change, right? So they're more amenable. Or we can say we're doing Agile.
There's a one-to-one mapping of all current accountabilities roles.
Yeah, without having to actually change anything. Here's the project manager who runs the Scrum team, right? Okay. What all of these endeavors, and I'm being generalistic, so if one of your endeavors is slightly different, I'm not trying to poop on that, but almost all of the endeavors that I have seen have been trying to focus on addressing that difference between the fundamental premise of distrust to the fundamental premise of trust.
I see it differently. It's really weird. It's like the overweight person who's going to the umpteenth fitness coach, and the fitness coach says to them, do more exercise, eat less food. And they're like, but you suck. I don't want to hear that. I'm going to go and get another fitness coach that says that I can eat pies, drink beer, and binge on Netflix. That's until I get the fitness coach that tells me that, you're all wrong. And I think there's been a fair chunk of that out in the world where people just go, oh, give me the magic wand. And unfortunately, there's a lot of big consultancies out there making huge coin, just going in there going, yeah, you can still operate on distrust, and we can nano manage, and we can yell and tell, and, life will be golden. Because it's very hard to go into a large organization and say, look, fundamentally, we need to empower our teams. We need to invert control. We need to delegate accountability. We need to be clear about the constraints. We need to support our people's decision-making process, get on with it. And I've seen an example where there's few examples where that has worked better than others.
Yep.
But it requires true executive buy-in.
Yep.
And it's non-trivial, because every time I've seen it, it gets so far, and then at some point somebody goes, yeah, I think it's better off if I make all the decisions, because it's risk managed. And that's where it breaks down. And then somebody says, oh, we should try version X. And I've been in places where you couldn't use Agile vocabulary because it had been burnt because of change fatigue.
Yep.
And I really, I reckon the next place to go to is less framework, not more. And so that if we double down on some principles and just said, look, what we want is short feedback loops, clear articulation of value, and continuous improvement. That's it. Don't care what you call it. Don't care how you do it. Just make sure your feedback loop's shorter than a month. Make sure that whatever you're giving to your customer is safe, as in risk-free, is consumable by them with no potential damage, not a framework reference. Make sure it's finished, completed, and then learn from that, at least monthly. I think that's where it should be going. But then we're going to need people who've been there, done that, build products to be able to coach and guide that and help have enough organizational intelligence, understanding of politics, emotional intelligence, all that whole spectrum of stuff to be able to help people find the way.
Unfortunately, Simon, that just currently isn't fundamentally possible, because the demand for those people ridiculously vastly outstrips the supply of them.
I disagree. I don't think there's enough organisation that have got the actual balls to ask somebody to come in, challenge their way of thinking, and support them changing. There's very few that do it. Most of them just want to pay the panacea. I actually sacked a client because they wanted me there as window dressing, saying, yeah, we're Agile because we got this clown.
Yep.
He's got the badges, so we must be Agile. Whereas I just went, you're wasting my time and your money because you're really not interested in changing. So you know what? I'm out.
Yeah, I've had that conversation with clients as well when I've been asked to support a department, and they said, hey, help these guys. And I go there and no one wants to. And I said, well, I can keep harassing them, but they're not going to go anywhere because they don't want to. Right? I have to go to their desk to be able to talk to them. They won't showing up to any of our catch-ups.
Yeah, get out of my lounge room. I'm quite happy sitting here eating my pizza, watching Netflix. I'm going to get fit on my terms. I really don't want to go to the gym. It's not your job to tell me.
I think it's very much true what Ken has always said, which is that organizations are most willing to change when they've just totally and utterly failed to achieve whatever it is they were set out to achieve, right? That's when...
I think that's what Cotter mentions as well, right? Burning platform in leading change, right?
Yeah.
What's their burning need for change?
There's got to be a trigger or motivation, right? So it's either they're transitioning phase, they're growing, they're expanding. There's a realization that there's some opportunity in the marketplace, but
isn't this
basically something's highlighting that they need to do something different, right?
Isn't this the difference between so for me, there's a huge difference between me helping an organization, right? They need my specific skill set to help them, and that's where, you, Oscar, and you, Simon, are talking about, well, if I feel I can't help them, I'm not going to stick around and waste everybody's time, right? I'm going to go somewhere where I can help people. But fundamentally, organizations can only change from within. This is Martin's feeling, that organizations can only fundamentally change from within, and I can only support that change. I can't make that change, and I don't feel that any external bollocks can make change in an organization. It has to be there, and perhaps we're there to light the blue touch paper, right? But if the firework just goes, then there's not anything we can do about that as external people who don't actually work for the company and don't have any authority in the company.
There was something to what you were saying, and in the need for change and impacting change. This goes back to that wonderful group we're part of with our fellow peers. Someone shared something near and dear to my heart. CD Projekt Red, fantastic game studio, released some of my favorite games. Yep. I'm a massive nerd and gamer. And they only recently started working Agile, from what I understand.
In response to the Cyberpunk game failure.
Yeah, and I have played Cyberpunk since. It's a wonderful game, but when it first came out, massive disaster, huge flop, terrible reception.
The first one to get universal refund from Xbox and PlayStation, right? Cost them billions,
absolutely
damage. It's now
absolutely.
We're now years late, right? It's 3 years late. It took them to fix that mess, and it's interesting. Like Visual Studio did the same thing between 2010 and 2012. Like Visual Studio 2010 had more bugs than an Afghan camel driver's blanket, right? It was just riddled.
Simon, between the beta launch and the production launch, 45,000 bugs were fixed.
That's a lot, right?
Damn.
Now
that's incredible.
To tie into Martin's point,
working on it, that's a lot of bugs.
Yeah, so change can only ever come from someone, and like this is the coaching premise. Like the only person who can change you is you. Full stop. Now, when it comes to organizational change, like helping one person change is tricky. Helping lots of people change is exponentially tricky. And this is where working with leadership to create the conditions for change, and this is really important. This is where I find brain-based coaching fascinating, because it's about the two state. If you create an away state, we want to change from, it's a change based in fear and negativity. Whereas if you change a two state, and this is like Snowden's talking about, thinking about a direction of travel, it's more rewarding. It opens up more positivity. Now, when you're helping teams, departments, organizations move to that two state, you have to create direction, purpose, all that Kotter model stuff, but helping people get there. Now, what I've noticed sometimes, and this would probably go against a lot of what people say, oh, that's not proper coaching. Every now and then, hello, Witcher, every now and then you need to help people get unstuck. And this is where sometimes like people say, oh, you're a directive Scrum Master. It's like, yeah, because sometimes people need a little bit of cold, hard truth. And there's times where I've needed it where people just say, look, you suck, mate. Sort yourself out. Stop doing this. And it's like, oh, wow, I didn't even see it that way. And it's been super helpful. And this is why we need to balance it. And I'm just wondering whether this is where we're at with the need to move towards evidence-based work, the needs towards being more value-based, to be more ruthless and relentless in supporting our companies, and to actually engage in some of these tougher discussions, not to get out of the coaching stance into a bit of the consulting stance and just go, look, here's some cold hard truths. You know, this stuff needs to happen. That was a bit of a monologue. What do you reckon?
No, I think you're onto something there, and I think it's tricky because we see it a lot in. One of the things I really like doing is whatever we're doing in terms of work and professionalism, etc., I try to take it outside of there and take it into general life and other parts and see where things link up in terms of just how systems behave and how people behave. And you see the similar things in terms of addiction and other things as well. You know, if you have someone smoking or drinking too much, etc., you're not going to convince them to change. Doesn't matter how much you badger them, doesn't matter how many things you put in these boxes, until they decide to change, they will not change. And you see that a lot. Sometimes what you can do is you can facilitate that by making the impact clear. Right? Interventions, etc., have worked, for example, in terms of addiction, where people say, hey, you know what, you think it's only impacting you, but we are all impacted by this. And I think as coaches, sometimes that what we can do is help make the impact clear. I like to use a slightly inflammatory term, which is you don't have to become agile, but others will. And then when you're the last one not doing it, you're not going to be competitive. But you don't have to, right?
Yeah.
And it's cheeky, right? But it's kind of true. And when you try and paint that picture to people, they're like, oh, okay, so we are a market leader now. But in 5 years, maybe we won't be unless we change.
But isn't that... I feel like that's the truest form of consulting, right? Which is, as consultants, not coaches, right? But as consultants.
I was going to say, I don't like the word coach anymore, but yes.
Yeah. I don't like it either for that reason. But as a consultant, we're there to provoke change.
Even though it is provoke, but perhaps be a catalyst or an agent of change.
I would say that's just another word for provoking change.
Yeah,
The reason
maybe it's just because I'm not from Glasgow. I don't like the word provoke too much.
Yeah. Come at me, man. Come at me.
Yeah, you want some, Jimmy? I'll give you a head full of head, mate.
In Glasgow, it would be I'm going to stake you, right? Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. So I think that's that. Effectively, you're like, do you want to do a Kodak, right? Kodak were the world leaders for a hell of a long time.
Yep.
Kodak moment means a completely different thing now. Back when I was growing up, because I'm old, it meant take a photo of something really cool. Nowadays, it's referencing that point where you don't realize that your competition's about to wipe the floor with you. That's the Kodak moment these days. So, where are we getting to? Just thinking about time and our lovely listeners' ears. Words do matter, but don't get precious about it. To quote the lovely Eminem, I find it offensive, you find it offensive, you find me offensive. So stop being precious about it. Build a common understanding. Reserved words still need to be reserved. Go and see. Unless we in the leadership space start taking on our accountabilities as consultants and change agents more professionally, it's a dying career. So yes, there will be space. However, you best help more effective change be realized. Otherwise, just go away.
Yeah. There's something I like to share in all my classes, which is the number one rule is to not get fired if you care about the results of where you're going. And then you push as hard as you can up to that point. Because if you get fired, you can't help change.
Yeah, Ken always used to say there's no, dead scrum master's no good to anyone.
It's the same as what teenagers do, right? They push the bounds of the rules until we as parents believe that the rules we can change the rules, right? They're mature is the wrong word, but they're experienced enough to be able to cope with that change in the rules, and then the rules change. But I think in lots of organizations, there's a culture of fear. And that culture of fear prevents what it is we're talking about. You are never going to get any sort of meaningful change in an organization with a culture of fear.
So creating yeah, helping the leadership create the conditions of change. So this ties back to the Cottle model, understanding the motivation for change, helping people understand the purpose of the change, helping the organizations create the conditions of change, and then helping that organization unfreeze to start enacting the change. and be prepared for a rough ride, right? Change is hard. Doesn't matter which way you skin it. Doing things differently is tricky because it's different and it's hard and people are funny. That sort of rounds it out. So if you're listening, well, hopefully somebody else apart from us three are listening to this. We'd love to hear your comments. Hit us up.
Yeah.
What do you think? Are we on track? Did anything we say resonate with you? Is there questions from this that you think we haven't explored? Is there something you'd like to explore? What's your experiences? We'd love your feedback. Like, subscribe, tell friends. That'd be cool.
Would be cool.
That would be cool. And until next time, thank you very much, Martin. Thank you very much, Oscar.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for listening.
And that's Agile, actually.